So the next three elements, or sorry, the next three principles of design are movement, rhythm, and pattern. They are pretty similar in a lot of different ways, very interrelated, as are most of the principles. So I've got them combined here, and there's lots of different ways to create movement. We talked about when with line that you can create movement by putting diagonal lines in. And so here we've got two images. This one's got a slight diagonal. There's minimal movement in here, but there is movement. And then there's really extreme angles up here. And so there's, extreme movement over in here. And that gives a sense of movement and all of that crazy flowing lines in the hair, give that falling sensation and look. It doesn't look like something you just cut out and pasted. It looks like she's leapt up into the air. Right in here, we've got flowing movement that creates a pattern and a sort of rhythm. So when we get movement with repetition, repetition creates patterns. Patterns can create rhythms, and you can have rhythms without a whole lot of repetition and patterns. This single line has a few curves in it. It's not enough to really say it's got repetition and that it's forming a pattern. There's a little bit of a repetition here and here, but this has got soft, kind of elegant sort of a curve, and we can see that creating some sort of a rhythm. If we think about it in terms of music, here we've got a bunch of circles that are repeated. If it was just a repetition of full circles with other circles and dots over the top of it, that would be more along the lines of pattern with repetition. But because it's also got this snaking thing, we've got a distinct sense of movement, and it gives the rhythm, which would be, a series of dots would maybe be some sort of percussive or percussion pattern. It would be, something that you could clap or drum. With this flowing line, we think more along the lines of something that would, as music, it would vary in pitch. And of course, with rhythm is something that's a music term, and so there's within all of the arts and humanities and in general, line is something that transcends. We've got line in music, in poetry, in theater, and all sorts of things. There's lots of these will transition and cross over from one discipline to another. Many of the artistic movements are named after musical periods or vice versa, and so on. So with rhythm, the easiest way to understand it is thinking about music. And patterns, we recognize patterns as something with a repetition. We've got a pattern of the transitioning. Each color moves along the color line, transitioning from one to the other. We've also got this movement that creates a line going across here, but it creates a line by a pattern. It goes down a couple of crayons, and it goes up a couple of crayons, and it goes up and down, and that generally creates a flowing line. So that pattern will create a movement and a rhythm, and like I said, they're all very interrelated. You can have movement without, this doesn't really have any kind of a pattern, it's just movement because of the diagonals. This, again, one curvy line wouldn't have any movement, wouldn't have any pattern. There's not repetition, but it does have rhythm. And, this has one big spiral, but it also has these lines coming off of it, which give it a stronger sense of rhythm. And these are a little more challenging to talk about in a lot of your pieces, but hopefully you can at least understand them when they're talked about by others, in terms of, at least in terms of rhythm. With pattern, we can recognize patterns and movement between the diagonal lines and patterns and the ways our eyes move across a piece and follow those lines. We can get the sense of movement. Like I said, rhythm is one of the more challenging principles to kind of understand and wrap your head around. And this, we can see there's lots of diagonals, lots of flowy organic shapes. And so there's a sense of movement. It's going all over the place. There's a rhythm to it. A pattern is harder to identify, but there's a rhythm to it. If you imagine this with music in there, at least I can imagine there being a musical score represented. And, of course, one of the best ways to get the idea of representing musical rhythms with patterns is through videos. And, so we can see right in here, we've got a pattern that repeats, and then we've got these wavy lines coming across, and you can hear that in the music at the same time as you're seeing it visually throughout here. The lines coming across these hills as they come up will create patterns and a rhythm. We've got that each line represents the da 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 da, the steps in the notes, and then the overall flow of the line is what's making that hill. So we're running to escape, exit full screen. Okay, so there's rhythm and pattern. We can see movement, distinct movements. Each of these diagonal lines creates a movement, and there's a rhythm and a pattern here. And this one's got lots of these spikes that come up, and your eye will follow each of those up and around. This one is more wavy and curvy. And so we've got a different sort of a rhythm, different sort of a pattern. And, there's no regular logical sort of pattern to these, but there is consistency in the types of shapes and forms we're seeing, which can be interpreted as a pattern.